Welcome to our April 2017 installment of the Brooks Group's Briefings for Sales Leaders. Our Briefings series is made up of hyper-targeted webinars designed to give sales leaders the tools, strategies, and tactics they need to help their reps find more success in an increasingly competitive marketplace. Our Briefings tagline is Brief, Bright, brought to you in 19 minutes, and it's our commitment to give you actionable ideas you can use today in less than 20 minutes. I'm Will Brooks, COO of the Brooks Group.
And I'm Steve Hackett, Regional VP of Sales.
In this month's Briefing, Steve Hackett will give you, our listeners, some very tangible ways to make something that's very painful, lost deals, into a positive learning experience that can help your reps sell more business. So, without further ado, let's dive into the content.
Well, losing deals hurts. Losing big deals really hurts. In today's complex selling environment, utilizing personnel and resources from your company will be required to win deals. When you lose an opportunity, it doesn't just impact the salesperson, it can affect the entire organization.
So it's interesting, Steve. You mentioned complex selling environment. Why don't we kind of level set? Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, it's more complicated than it's ever been. You've got multiple people, multiple departments, multiple departments that have different agendas on what they want to accomplish. It isn't the traditional, I talk to one person, I can make a deal. It's a stepped approach to completing sales. I may have to interact with anywhere, I think recently we've seen anywhere from 10 to 12 different people on any deal that I'm working on in some organization. So just the fact that we've had so many more people, it adds to the dimension of complexity just because of the number of people in departments.
Absolutely. Okay, well, the big question, I think really the one that brought all of our listeners to us today, Steve, is how can salespeople learn from failures, i.e. lost deals, and set themselves up for future success? So talk to us.
You know, Will, we certainly have learned lessons from the thousands of salespeople we have worked with worldwide over the past 40 years. The lessons and experiences provided insight and a perspective. We won't win them all, but I would like to share a story I heard from a great golf coach, Butch Harmon, which I think is very relevant to the world of sales today. I had the privilege of hearing Butch Harmon talk about the great world-class golfers he's worked with. And he said something that really stuck with me. Bad shots, bad holes, that's golf. You control what you think. Don't get stuck in your own head. There's always another shot or another hole waiting for you. Now just think about that for a second as it applies to sales. Learn from, adjust, and evolve from our failures. There's always another opportunity to pursue.
We live to fight another day, Steve.
So let's just talk about the 5 steps to set yourself up for future success.
Okay, Steve, so very fundamental, very foundational, but I think something that, frankly, a lot of reps overlook because this is a difficult thing to do. But it looks like your first tip here is to seek direct, honest feedback from decision makers. So tell us a little bit about that.
So after we get frustrated, throw our pens and papers on the floor, toss our phones down, after we let the initial emotion go out, how do we learn from this? And this is, you mentioned, it could be a very difficult thing for people to do, and they may be very uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be that way. I found just having a conversation with decision makers after losing a deal to be extremely beneficial. Here's an example of how you would approach it, and certainly be sincere. As a professional courtesy, what could our company have done differently in order to be more successful with the next opportunity? Just like in golf, we don't let the previous bad shot impact the next one. In the world of sales, we don't want to let the previous failure impact the next opportunity. Now, when you ask that question, be prepared for the universal sales blow-off. And here's what they're going to tell you. Your price was too high. You just weren't competitive. People don't want to necessarily tell you the real truth on why they didn't select you or your organization. So price is the easy way out. So you need to respond with something like this. Hey, let's take price off the table. What can we do to be successful with the next opportunity? Now, this is very important. no matter what their response, you need to be professional and take to heart any feedback that they provide you.
Absolutely. Okay, so we talked about, getting past that first hurdle, getting willing to have that conversation. Now, tip 2, it looks like, Steve, is go back and look at your proposal.
Well, in this complex selling environment, which we mentioned earlier, it will involve multiple people in the decision-making process. So you need to have a strategy to navigate this buying unit. If there's one area that we hear consistently from our clients, it's this complex selling environment that's directly impacted their world. Transactional being more strategic, strategic being more transactional. I think back at 2008, 2009 and the experiences that we had all the way across the board with the economy going south. It impacted all of us. So how do we do this effectively? Number one, did we truly understand and appreciate the internal organizational dynamic, spheres of influence, and the culture of the company? Did we recognize the different approaches and competing agendas of decision makers? It's not always easy to understand the stated and the unstated goals of the people involved in the decision. And this is an important point. If we're going to go back and look at the proposal, did we have solid internal advocates or coaches to help guide us through the process?
Right. The information you were getting, I mean, was that on target? Did that really match the reality?
Yeah. And Will, I mean, we have clients that they may have 5 or 6 hurdles that they have to go over successfully before they even get to a contract. We call that the sale within the sale. So how do I negotiate that sale within the sale, and what's my strategy for those individual people that I'm going to have to get their approval and buy-in in order to move forward?
So when I look at this, 2 things come to mind. Number one, I think back to tip number 1. If you're going to take a look at your proposal, you need to have the information to compare it against. During that initial conversation, you got to ask questions, Steve, that play to these factors here. Yeah.
We talk about the questions that we ask and the level of depth in the questions that we have to get to. It's getting to the emotion of all decision. So if I have multiple people, they all have multiple agendas. So what is their agenda and what is the emotion of their decision in order to bring that all home?
You got it. Okay, number 3. This is one of my favorite concepts, actually. Evaluate the perceived emotional cost. So I think that there's, 2 ways of looking at that. I'd love to hear your perspective. And then,
the role of perceived emotional cost in decision-making process is absolutely essential for all salespeople to understand. As a salesperson, we always tend to think in terms of its price or it's the potential investment of the solution. That's the big hurdle for us. Prospects or buyers don't think that way. They think in terms of what is the perceived emotional cost of this decision. Now, let me give you some examples of perceived emotional cost. Is this the right solution for us? Do I really trust this salesperson or this organization? If I change vendors, how will it impact my organization? I really like this one, and we've seen this more and more, Will. Is this a good career move for me? Whether you're a large organization or a small organization, careers are made or broken by the decisions that we make. So they have a significant impact. So don't ever underestimate how important that is to the individual. Other example of a perceived emotional cost is time, energy, risk, change. Maybe I'm going to have to forfeit a relationship with someone who I've been doing business with for a period of time. These are all perceived emotional cost. And when we do exercises with salespeople in our program, we'll ask them to actually kind of do a postmortem on a deal. And if salespeople are really honest with themselves, most opportunities are lost to some perceived emotional cost that was never recognized, or they discounted its importance. They failed to realize how significant that was, and they didn't address it early on in the process.
So let's step away from the lost deal analysis concept for a second, Steve. And while we're on this topic, Why don't you tell us a little bit about, maybe some questions the rep can ask during the sales process to get to some of this information so that we can avoid the deal loss analysis to begin with?
So, Will, let's just talk about change. Let's talk about relationships. Let's just talk about a few of those. What we're talking about here is early on in the sales process when you're qualifying the opportunity, you're probing and asking your questions. You need to ask questions like this. How do you feel about change? How do you feel about changing vendors? How will that impact you? How will that impact your organization? If you decided to potentially change, what is going to be required to make this a good decision for you and your organization? Because if we fail to ask those questions early on, it comes back to that price was too high when we've actually made a recommendation. We fail to realize the importance of those decisions. So if you know, and there's a perceived emotional cost in every decision, you need to address those right up front. Better to know it up front and deal with it in your recommendation than to underappreciate it and lose a deal because you didn't appreciate it.
Excellent. All right, number 4, nail down the definition of a qualified lead. Bring this alive, Steve.
When we talk about most organizations, many organizations have not really clearly defined what a qualified lead or a qualified opportunity looks like. Many of our clients will look at it a little bit differently, or they go with the approach that, if somebody's just asking me for a price, or they provide us an RFP or an RFQ, then they must be qualified. You need to clearly identify what is a qualified lead or an opportunity for you. One of the characteristics of a fully qualified opportunity for us is that they have a need and that they're aware of it. Now, one of the things that we know today is that most prospects have a lot of information, and some of that information may be correct or it may not be correct. Our job as professional consultative salespeople is to educate. The more quality information we can provide and the more confidence people have, the better our opportunities are for making decisions. So nowhere does it state that they have a need to change from their current provider. Never assume, verify. Are they really interested in potentially changing vendors or looking at new products and new services from different vendors? Saying it and meaning it is not always easy to determine.
So what I hear you saying here is without an objective set of criteria against which to determine whether an opportunity is qualified or not, you really can't conduct a solid deal loss analysis. So while we're on this concept, you referenced that we teach 5 characteristics. Why don't you just go ahead and lay those out there for us?
Some people may think it's 6, 7, or 8, but for us, these are the core 5. Number 1, they have a need and they're aware of it. We can raise the awareness of the need. Do they recognize that they have a need for whatever the products or services that you represent or potentially changing vendors? Number 2, and I think this is a hard target, that the person you're talking to has the legitimate authority and the ability to say yes. This has changed dramatically. More often than not, decisions are made by committees. There's multiple people involved. Do we understand the dynamic of the organization? Who are the people that have authority? Who are the people that can say yes, and who are the people that can block us? We need to understand the dynamic of the decision-making process within the organization. Number 3, they have a sense of urgency about the decision. We're talking about a defined time frame. If somebody is just requesting a quote for you for pricing purposes or for budgetary purposes, that's not a qualified opportunity because there's no defined time frame for the decision. Number 4, they trust you and the organization. Notice that I said you first. You are the face of the organization with the opportunity. And number 5, they're willing to listen to you. Unfortunately, Will, too many salespeople think that number 5 is the be-all, end-all, and that's all I need to have in order to have a legitimate opportunity.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something too, that number 2 for us, the authority and the ability to buy in today's complex marketplace can be absolutely mysterious, right? So without some sort of a strategy or methodology to map that out and really understand that, I think you're operating rather blindly.
it goes even further than that, Will. It has to be a strategy for each individual person within the organizational dynamic and the spheres of influence within the organization. We need to have a strategy around that. And that's why we need those coaches.
Absolutely. All right, so tip number 5, and what I would call more of a mindset tip, self-awareness and analysis. So Steve, tell us about this one.
Well, we need to be able to honestly look at ourselves and our organization. Salespeople can be optimistic to a fault. We all believe that no matter what we're working on, we can win this opportunity. That's why we love working with salespeople, because of that enthusiasm. But we really need to have a little bit of self-awareness and maybe some objective analysis to see if, in fact, it was a legitimate opportunity. So here's a little checklist. Did I do my best? Can I honestly say I did my best? Was this even a realistic opportunity that we could win as an organization? How well were we positioned for this opportunity, especially against the competition? If you or your organization were not the right fit, the deal was a long shot to begin with. So if it's a long shot, but we took a shot at it, we should be able to take pride in that we did our best to earn that opportunity. The lesson is learn how to better qualify and evaluate opportunities up front. We don't want to do postmortems. We want to win more opportunities right up front, and that starts with being able to prioritize and spend time with the right opportunities because of the criteria that we use to qualify them up front.
Absolutely. And again, this is a mindset thing here, tip 5, right? I mean, if the sales rep is so, let's say, stung by defeat, or they just can't see clearly what happened, I think this is going to be a tough one. And I think back to tip number 1 as well, the whole notion of reaching out to someone who has unfortunately, rejected you or your organization and have that conversation. That's a mindset thing too. So, hopefully, we've shared some good tactical tips here, but 1 and 5 are especially, sometimes difficult, I think, to execute on.
Those are really the bookends. Well, one is going to the client, and the second one is looking internally.
Yeah.
So we have both. Well, these are just 5 lessons that we've learned over time. I hope these will provide the sales leaders on our call today some insights and maybe some opportunities to coach and develop their sales team. We appreciate their time today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, before we sign off, Steve, I think you were telling me about a client visit you had. You've referenced this complex marketplace thing several times. Talk to me.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I was visiting with a large organization, industrial organization that we work with, and I had all the senior leaders in the group. And it was funny. The first comment I asked them about their 2017 sales environment. Here's the first comment that they made to me. Man, this is really complex and it's really different. And I thought it was very telling.
Absolutely, and I don't think they're alone in that. If reps today are going to succeed in a complex sales environment, they need to shift their mindset and their approach from tactical to strategic. And that's why we developed our newest program, Impact for the Complex Marketplace. That program allows salespeople to effectively navigate larger decision-making units, become a resource capable of driving change, and present high-level proposals that bring real value to the buyer. Part of the skills salespeople will master in this program is a post-sale analysis, how to analyze a loss or a win to build relationships and learn from stumbles. And of course, that's done on a much, much deeper level than we've touched on here. So, folks, that's about it. We committed to get this thing done in 19 minutes, and we are right now at 18 minutes and 50 seconds. So again, this is Will Brooks, joined by Steve Hackett. If you'd like to learn more about impact selling for the complex marketplace, please jump on our website, www.brooksgroup.com. Of course, you can reach out to Steve directly. His email address is steve@thebrooksgroup.com. He'll be happy to answer any questions. So until next time, thank you so much.